Hey all, here are OS Reviews. Recently we did a review on the Teclast T-bao 20 Pro, part of the higher performance laptops that they have released, but today we're taking a look at a contrast in the form of one of the cheapest models that the company has. So this is under their F line, so still under the regular Teclast branding, and it's called the F6. It actually sells for around $200, so it's definitely much more of a budget laptop. This one here is a 13.3-inch laptop, so it's a little bit smaller than the full-size 15.6 inches we saw on the other model, although it still is using a Full HD 1080p IPS panel that is matte. Fairly clean and modern design, but it is made entirely out of plastic on this model and has 1.28 kilograms in terms of weight, so this is very light. Otherwise, it has up to 7 hours of battery life that's claimed using the Intel Apollo Lake N3350 processor, which is, again, fairly entry-level by today's standard. They're getting you 8 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, which is more than average. Typically for $200 laptops, I've seen it closer to about 4 gigs, so this should get you a little bit more room to do multitasking on here. And then we have 128 gigs of SSD. Now, aside from the laptop, we also get the charging adapter, which you can see here is pretty compact in terms of the size, but it is using a barrel plug connection that looks like this, because this laptop, although it does have a USB Type-C port, it does not support charging or power delivery via Type-C. So the laptop itself is very lightweight since the entire thing is constructed out of a polycarbonate plastic, but it doesn't feel too cheap or flimsy either. I can kind of press down on it, and there's not too much flexing on the lid, as you can see there, and overall it doesn't attract too much fingerprints or smudges. You'll find access to a USB 3.0 Type-A port, the charging adapter. There's also a micro HDMI port, so this is not full-sized HDMI, and there's also a aforementioned Type-C that is for data. Then on the other edge, we do have access to a micro SD card reader, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and a second USB 3.0 Type-A full-sized port. Now on the very back here, we do have the stereo speakers, although they are just facing downwards on this particular model, so they can be a little easy to get muffled up, but works best if you're on a flat surface. And then we have the 4 rubber feet that prevents it from sliding around, as well as, more importantly, there is that door where you can access the SSD for further upgrading or swapping that out, which is pretty convenient since you don't have to open up the entire back cover. Overall, a simple but clean looking design. Now the hinge here can also be opened using one hand, which I do like. One thing to note though is that the hinge doesn't lie completely flat 180 degrees, so this is kind of as far back as it will go, and overall it's fine when it comes to viewing angles and whatnot, but just make sure you don't push it further back. And the keyboard is pretty spacious. They've taken up the entire width of the overall laptop. Pretty comfortable layout, I have to admit, when it comes to using this, typing out essays or emails. No real complaints there. Of course, we don't have a dedicated numpad, but it is what it is. Arrow keys, pretty typical layout. Power button is also integrated with the keyboard here on the side, so I do usually prefer it to be separated just to make it a little bit harder to accidentally press, but overall not bad. There's also some status LEDs here that tells us if the laptop is turned on, caps lock. Again, the keyboard isn't backlit, but to be expected at this price, and we do also have 2 microphones here located on the top of the keyboard. Usually I also like to see this maybe integrated on the top along with the camera, but overall not too bad. 2 microphones do cancel out a little bit of noise when you are making calls. Finally, the trackpad here is also a decent size. They kind of took up as much room as they could. Again, not as large as on the 20 Pro's keyboard, but not shabby. Here, just for reference, next to kind of a average phone these days, it has a 6-inch display, so you get that idea. You can also use multi-touch gestures working just fine with a left and right click portion towards the bottom of the trackpad. The display does get reasonably bright, even if you're outdoors with some sunlight hitting on it. It still is, for the most part, visible thanks to the fact they're using a matte display, so it's not very glossy or reflective, which is good, although it doesn't maybe look quite as premium as having a glass covering. But personally, I prefer matte displays because they are a little bit more practical, especially since this is not a touchscreen model. Now anyways, if we take a quick look at the range of the brightness, this is at the maximum and this is at the dimmest setting that you can go to. Now if anything, I would say that the range on the display here for minimum might be still a little bit too bright in my opinion. I think it should be further reduced if you are in bed, and making it just a little bit more comfortable on the eyes. But overall, not a bad display, certainly in terms of the viewing angles. Everything still looks quite good. Not a TN panel, so it doesn't wash out even if you're looking at it from various degrees. Colors, for the most part, still are looking natural enough. It's slightly on the colder side in terms of the color temperature, but again, not bad at all for the budget price that we're looking at. We have around 80 gigs of storage that is left, 40 gigs taken up by the operating system. Not the most storage in the world, but it will definitely get you by in terms of installing some programs as well as games and apps, and then you can always supplement things further using an SD card or cloud storage. And some other remarks again being that this is a energy efficient chipset, so it is completely fanless, and that's how they were also able to make it so slim, so you won't really hear any noise in the background. Granted, when you are doing really heavy tasks for the laptop, such as doing a lot of web browsing with tons of tabs open, watching back 4K videos, it will get a little bit warm towards the center region of the keyboard. Never gets too hot, but it is one thing to keep in mind. If it's on your lap, it can definitely accumulate a little bit of heat, but not too bad or concerning, I'd say, at the end of the day. Now, other things that we can quickly check under system properties, we can also verify that it is using a Qualcomm-based network adapter card that supports AC for Wi-Fi, dual band, and I was always consistently getting full bars, so pretty good in terms of remaining connected, didn't get dropped or anything like that. Battery life remains an area where I think that the laptop could be a little bit better, but it's not too shabby. In my test, I got a little closer to 6 hours in most cases, using the screen at 50% brightness and watching back videos and other light web browsing tasks. So it could be, again, a little bit stronger, I feel, but also not too bad, and overall charges up in around 2.5 hours. In terms of some of the other system properties, the battery, by the way, you can also optimize further by tweaking the overall processing speed that you want. We turn it all the way up to best performance, which will kind of max out the processor's clock speed, but also drain power more quickly, or go into one of the eco modes. So doing a quick web browsing test, let's try to open up a page like The Verge. Pretty complex site with lots of videos and ads and other elements, but it's also not doing too bad of a job, as you can see there, in terms of loading things along. So a trend that we've been seeing recently is even on entry-level computers, it is still perfectly sufficient these days for doing things like web browsing, and I'm glad to see that. So you can use, of course, either Chrome or the default Edge browser, and both will get you a decent experience there. The trackpad, surprisingly, I found to be pretty responsive so far. It may not be something made out of glass or ultra premium, but gets the job done, and I found that it's responsive enough when it comes to swiping. At 8 gigabytes, you'll be able to do a little bit more multitasking, keeping more tabs open in the browser than usual for a budget laptop, and you can definitely swap back and forth between those tabs. Things are, for the most part, still held in the system's memory and RAM. Let's go and play back something, turn it up to 4K, and see how it handles itself. It might be a little bit slower coming out of the aforementioned Teclast 20 Pro that has definitely more powerful internals, but will also load here in a moment. Let's also turn up the volume here of the speakers. Alright, so turning the sound down, overall takeaways, the speaker quality is actually not too bad. In fact, I would say it's average. Again, placement maybe not the best in the world. I usually prefer to have speakers at least on the top, but for what it is, it gets decently loud, and if it's on a flat surface, not bad. It doesn't really distort even at higher volumes. And in terms of playing back this video, even though we are at 4K, as you can see there, it's actually playing it back pretty smoothly once the video starts. It takes an extra second or two for it to actually buffer and load, but afterwards, pretty good. Granted, I am seeing a few more dropped frames compared to the 20 Pro, but still it's not too noticeable to the actual person that is watching the video. It still looks smooth enough as you are kind of playing things along, scrubbing between parts of the video, and although it just takes a little bit longer for things to load, not too bad, still is very reasonable, I feel, and doesn't become annoying. Now again, the processing power in terms of synthetic benchmarks is pretty tried and tested. N3350 is getting us a score a little bit north of 1100, which is definitely on the lower end of the spectrum these days. Sure, it's going to be a little faster than some of the Atom-based processors from just a year or two ago, but this is definitely not something that will rival more powerful machines with a Core M or Core I series for sure. But the thing here is that it's actually not not too bad in terms of optimization, because despite the low score, everything is still definitely usable in terms of the overall fluidity and speed. Again, helped by the fact that they are using a relatively quick and snappy SSD, along with a bit more RAM than what we usually see. Other areas where this laptop will work just fine include some basic document editing, whether it's Word, Excel, PowerPoint, things for school or light office productivity, no real issues here. So whether it's going to be just jotting down some notes quickly, whether it's through a kind of document, maybe it takes a split second longer compared to more powerful laptops, but for the most part, you can definitely get some basic work done and it doesn't feel too unresponsive. Everything will still load. One thing to note, of course, is unlike a few years ago when Microsoft sometimes bundled in a free version of Office with your computer, these days it seems like with Windows 10 especially, they're getting you maybe just a month or a year's free trial. Afterwards, these programs can then expire and you have to go premium or purchase the actual suite. So that is one thing to keep in mind if you are a student. But for what it is, it's not bad. It's pretty standard. It's helped by the fact that I think that the keyboard is pretty responsive and large and easy to type on. And in terms of the webcam performance, I also find it to be perfectly fine. It's not going to be crystal sharp compared to higher resolution sensors, but it is around 2 megapixels. It is going to be full HD, and you can definitely use it for Teams and Skype. No real issues there. Webcam I do find to be a little bit on the weaker side, a bit soft, and since it is on the keyboard deck, if you're typing at the same time, it can sometimes pick up some of that sound. But for what it is, it's perfectly fine just for some light overall video chatting, things like that. Now, of course, this is a full-blown Windows computer at the end of the day, so you can install any executables, any legacy software that you find on the web. That's compared to Chrome OS, which is a little bit more restrictive to mobile apps. Now, if you're trying to do a bit of gaming, that is an area of weakness on any budget laptop, so I would really stick with either older retro-style titles or just try any cloud streaming solutions instead of trying to play back the games locally because of the weaker integrated graphics and the entry-level processor that we're looking at here. Half-Life 2 or CSGO, and you'll usually get around 20 to 30 frames per second. Things like Photoshop editing can also be alright for simpler tasks. So if you need something for more serious work such as video editing and playing back more games, then of course you have to pay more for a higher end model with the GPU and the processor at the end of the day. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Teclast F6, and surprisingly, it's actually not too bad, I have to say, for an entry-level laptop. In fact, there's some places that I actually like this a little bit more than the 20 Pro, one of them being that the hinge you can open up and close with one hand just feels pretty well put together there. The keyboard and trackpad are surprisingly good in terms of the size and overall being pretty responsive. It's lightweight, super easy to take with you when on the go, and not bad when it comes to general web browsing. You can check out more details if you're interested, but for now that's been our video of the Teclast F6 entry-level laptop.